we'll get straightened out. All right, call the meeting to order.
Weedman,
Here.
Mack,
Here.
Braden,
Here.
LaCroy,
Here.
Miller, here, Nash, here, Strack.
Here.
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
Second. Miller. Aye. Strack.
Aye.
Mack,
Aye.
Weedman,
Aye.
Braden,
Aye.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Nash.
Aye.
Anybody sign up for public comments there, Kristen?
Nope.
Next is board reports. Anybody have anything that they wish to report?
We haven't met since the Triple I conference. As you all know, I served as your delegate to the delegate convention, and the highlight of that was, again, the resolution 1 about arming teachers. It was defeated again, this time by a margin greater than last year's. And I think the rest of the resolutions were largely voted as per our recommendation as well.
Good. Excellent.
I did. Last week I attended the governing board meeting for CEDAL, so that's the one that occurs once every quarter. I stepped off the executive committee, but retained my seat on the governing board. And they have a lot of stuff going on at CEDAL at the moment. So there was a large crowd for public comment with some of the concerns that you're probably seeing in the news that are public knowledge at this point. And the superintendent is working very hard to put in place new opportunities, new policies to help with those. It's a very large and tangled web. The governing board has directed the superintendent to increase the size of the task force to include more voices at the table. And so we're hoping that there's going to be an addition of perhaps some governing board members to the task force to look at the different issues across all of CEDAL. And try to get some resolution on some of that stuff. So she'll be coming out with an updated release to all the member districts. There likely is going to be more articles coming out in the public as well. So keep on the lookout for those, and then ask me any questions you have. I'll bring them back to Val, and then get an answer for you if we need any more information. But that's where we're at.
What's your level of concern for our students and
I'm concerned. So I have concern for a couple of different things. I think she's finding herself in a situation where, I don't know, she can't share all kinds of information because of ongoing investigations. And so I think that's not well understood in the community. And Heather was at that meeting. She can certainly add her comments if she'd like. And so I'm concerned that there's a little bit of lack of knowledge, but only because there's ongoing investigations that she can't share. I'm not concerned about the safety of our students in any way, shape, or form, because I think there are policies in place that are protecting, and I know that for sure. So, yeah. Outside of that, I think what needs to happen, I think there's some change going on, and as with anything, there is discomfort with that. But I think some of it is because of the situation. She can't share too much. Did you have anything to add to that, Heather, based on we touched base briefly too after the meeting, just to talk?
I just want to comment to this. I'll just yell at you. The safety component. I have regularly been in those buildings with interacting with the staff and the students. It was important to me to make sure our students were safe and learning. So, including twice in the last week for IEP meetings and such. So that has been a commitment to make sure that I can speak to what I've been seeing with families or anything like that. So, and if there was cause for concern for safety, I would certainly be acting upon that pretty quickly. So, Just want
Yeah,
to share.
and
that.
we had an opportunity to discuss that,
Mhm.
so it was good, so I think,
Yeah.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
Thank you.
That's it.
On the lighter note, I went to Starbucks on Haynesville Road. I don't know if you guys have been there, but it's so cute. Mrs. Kurzweil, is that how you pronounce it, from Park, had her kids do a kindness campaign. So all the sleeves on the Starbucks cups have little messages from the kids, which I thought was yay her. And then I don't know if we're going to go around and talk about Triple I or not, but I thought this was pretty exciting, actually. Jim and I were both ended up there, not on purpose, but at the Huntley presentation, and they have found a way to cut their utility costs by over 50% in the last decade by going green, including solar panels, and then that resulted in $1 million in annual energy savings. So I thought that might be something we could look at, given our financial
And
situation.
a couple of ideas that came out of there were some energy saving programs that are done by different companies. So basically, they evaluate your buildings, including ComEd does something similar to that. Where they come in and they evaluate your buildings and they say, okay, this is where we have opportunity, or this is where we see something is not working correctly or as efficiently as it should be, kind of put things on your radar to be replaced with more energy efficient stuff. So there was quite a few things in there. Christy Braden put together a document and sent it to everybody. So if you can put your notes into that document, might make it easier to share and report out to everybody to see their comments. So there was a lot of good information that came out of that Green Initiative one too. So and you pick up a thumb drive.
Yeah, they had
We can share it,
I
too.
talked with one of their board members for about a half an hour, 45 minutes. Small world, his wife and I taught in the same district. We don't know each other, but small world. So anyway, I have that thumb drive and I've copied the presentation onto my computer and can share it. I think you're up first, but or I can make copies for you all if you want your own.
You probably can just share the whole thing through
Or I can do it
Google
that way too.
Docs. Then everybody just gets it there.
Yeah. It looked kind of
But there was some good
definitely
information
worth
that came
looking
out
at.
of it.
And I actually scheduled a ComEd assessment for my house just to see how it all works. It's next week, so I can share that if you want that too.
There was one topic that I was at one where the state superintendent was at, and she talked about the next census that is coming up and the importance of making sure that we have everybody counted, and what it means to the state of Illinois alone, in federal dollars coming in, but also what it would mean to our education system. One of the suggestions that she had made was possibly having schools host a census night for those that don't have access to a computer or, might be afraid to fill out the forms or something like that. And I was thinking something along with her BPAC type of meetings that we could do some sort of a program, put computers up and stuff like that for them to fill out the census questionnaire online. So that was one of the things that I kind of took away from that one. At least it's an opportunity to involve us and those that are typically undercounted to get them counted.
I like that idea a lot, since it's not hard to see that there are certain forces wanting certain segments of the population to be undercounted.
Mhm.
To do whatever we can to encourage the counting of
And-
everybody.
And from what I have seen, I have that to be one of the BPAC programs, but what I see is it seems to be fairly well attended, and we at least gain their trust to be able to come in, and that might be the opening of the door for them to be able to fill that out without feeling like they're being looked at.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, why don't you give comments to make about that?
I put her on the spot.
Stephanie has lost her voice, and so.
Microphone. phone and you're good.
So yes, that was one thing that was a lot about the census count and hosting a census night. We know that we're already going to lose 1 seat, but depending on how many people fill out the census, Illinois is out to possibly lose 2 seats. So at the Congress level. So they did talk about how we can have a census night and kind of make it less scary, right? Because you're really not shining a beam on your house. We're just saying, we need to know how many people are here, we need to get funding, and I think it turned out to be like $15,000 a household over a child K through 8 that the state would lose for each family who goes uncounted. And very important. And so yes, in March, we are going to have a census night through BPAC and hopefully get the word out that it's not scary, right? It's here to help.
We'll continue to let us know if there's anything we can do to support that effort, please.
And one more thing, I met with Kristen Hoypel today actually, and she is interested, nope, never mind. She wanted me to let you know that the foundation just awarded Park and GMS, and there was a district-wide grant too. And if I recall correctly, at least 2 of them, if not all 3, deal with language arts. So that was good. And then, I met with Keith Grinnell because I had a paper due on Sunday that asked me to do a district assessment of utilities and building assessments, and was able to get on the Energy Star profile portfolio, and then also the Solar Edge monitoring system. So I thought I'd throw that out there if anyone's interested in the solar panels and what they're doing in addition to utilities. He was great, by the way. Really helpful.
Anybody else have anything else they want to add? Okay. It's up to you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start by talking about some items related to professional development for administrators. So as we were talking about III, as you know, we had a number of administrators present as well. I can share with you, between our team, we went to quite a few different workshops. We're still processing and seeing, if there are some initiatives that we can move forward with and learnings that we received that we need to talk about. But generally, here's a quick list of some of the ones that seemed most impactful. We went to workshops on bargaining, legislative issues, culturally responsive communications, the needs of English learners, pensions, and teacher shortages. So those were some of the topics that we were learning about. As Chris and I both mentioned a little earlier last week, he and I were at the Kriya Bocek law firm for a workshop, for a seminar that they did for all of their member districts. That was very focused on the policies that we were just discussing in the policy committee. But it was really very nice for us to have that opportunity. Last week I was at a superintendent's roundtable meeting. The speaker was Dr. Yvette Dubiel. She's the Executive Director of Equity and Professional Learning from DuPage County Regional Office of Education. I've heard her speak several times, and she focused often on the concept of when we're looking at looking at things through an equity lens. It's wonderful to be glad about how far we've come, but you can't hover there. You have to always be looking towards the future and continuing to improve. So that was, I think, a great thing to hear. Dr. Diaz was recently at the State Bilingual Conference. She said it was a great conference, and additionally, she just presented at a conference. And can you take a moment to share what you presented? Come on back.
So yes, I had the opportunity just to present at the Raising Student Achievement Conference. And my presentation was Spanish for non-Spanish speakers. And so basically it was an intro to EL, and the attendants or participants had the opportunity to feel like an English learner for a little bit. And then acknowledging the fact that if you come with English or a little bit of any other language, you have so much information to help you unlock the language of your students, and how a little bit about how your brain works, and then how to just really honor where you are, where your students are, and then go up from there. And so a lot of different resources and a lot of strategies, and we had fun. It was a very nice presentation.
Thank you. In addition, we had some instructional coaches do a presentation very recently. So Paul, will you talk about that?
So we're always very excited for when our staff can go and show the good things that are happening in our district so that we can share that good information with other districts. So we had two groups also at the Raising Student Achievement Conference. So that was Laura Golden, instructional coach at Frederick, and Linda Mizwicki, our writing specialist at Frederick GMS. Their topic was raising student achievement through thematic instruction, student thinking, and engagement. So all the things that we've been working on from PD, they were sharing how other districts can learn from us, and so that's exciting. And then we had three of our instructional coaches, Amy Schneider from Prairie View, Tammy Singer from Park, and Sarah O'Connell from Meadowview. Their topic was student engagement, putting the pieces together. And student engagement has been one of our focuses across the district, because the more we have students engaged in what they're working on, we know that their comprehension and their investment and their interest are going to be greater. So they're well received. The second presentation was at capacity, so it's always exciting to have our staff share out with other school districts after they've learned and worked with our staff. So I'm always proud when we have other people. I think we're going to try to continue to share when we have people going out to other places to show how great District 46 is. So it's really good.
Thanks, Paul. Board, as you know, one of my focuses this year is doing whatever I can to get to know our community and getting to know our parents and our students. So I'll now and again let you know about activities that I've been able to go to. So in the recent past, I was at the Prairie View Canvas and Cookies evening. Really, really cute. It's kind of like the painting activities that that you might see. So whole bunch of kids and their parents having an opportunity to paint a penguin, and then they had cookies. It was very cute. Just last night, I was at the Avon PTF meeting, so that's their parent group, and got to meet a bunch of wonderful people. It was kind of like a meet and greet last night. And tomorrow night, I'll be right back here at Shrek. And I don't know if you heard, we had a young man walking down the hall a little while ago singing, I believe, from Shrek. So I can't wait. So that's that. Stephanie, Dr. Diaz, this is your third time at the mic. Can you talk about the BPAC meeting that occurred last week?
Thank you. So last Friday we had a BPAC and ballet folklorico. So a folkloric ballet came and presented for about an hour, and they did many traditional dances from all over Mexico. It was very beautiful, and thank you, Leslie, very much for everything for coming and all the pictures and everything that were posted on social media. It was a very nice turnout. We had conchas, which are like a sweet bread from La Luz Bakery, and the students worked on crafts and made a fan. And then we opened with Nivia Talanda is a second grade bilingual teacher, and she's from Peru, so she taught us a traditional Incan dance, and so 6 teachers learned it, and so we opened the stage with that, and then we had an opportunity before the ballet all was ready. The kids kind of did group dances, and then the ballet took the stage, so it was a fun evening.
Thank you. I've asked Heather to speak to you for just a few moments about restraint and seclusion rooms. She made reference earlier to things that have been in the newspaper. I'm sure you've seen this topic has been in the newspaper quite a lot. We have had differences in state rules coming at us, sometimes as often as more than once in a day, I think. And I wanted her to be able to share with you kind of the state of things in our school district specifically.
So as she mentioned, things are moving very quickly. There was a knee-jerk reaction to a really harsh publication, which caused some emergency rules to go in effect, which then required me to work with a bunch of entities to help interpret our practices within the new guidance. And that's what continues to change. They pivot their parameters and things like that. Public entities that I'm working with include CEDAL, our attorney, I work with IAAC, which is the professional organization for special education administrators, who are also working with the, I wrote it down, Illinois Council of School Attorneys Special Ed Committee, which Kevin sits on. They are working downstate to help figure out the implications of the new rules within what we're doing in our schools. Specific to us, I actually, by the way, the board policy access we have, I've used it plenty of times, and this is one of the circumstances I was able to look up exactly what's in our policy, and it currently is in alignment with whatever school code says. So it's kind of general in that way, which is healthy. It uses the term isolated timeout, which isn't prohibited from now on, so we'll probably eventually have to change the language in that once we get more permanent rules. Essentially, isolated timeout is no longer allowed, period. Anywhere. We have never used isolated timeout as a practice in our district. So I wanted to affirm that. Timeout is a new permissible concept, and we're working to define that with all the attorneys. What does that look like? And it can never be used in the form of discipline, which we do not do that. It's usually when a student's in a dysregulated state, we support them in a smaller setting with some therapeutic measures to try to intervene. Additionally, physical restraints, our staff are certified. We have a huge plethora of staff of all roles in CPI, crisis prevention intervention, and we only use those techniques that we are certified to do. In the new rules, we are not allowed. Originally, we were not allowed to go to the ground with the students. They made that adjustment for specialized programs that do use a model that allows that. We do not. We've never allowed any restraint on the floor, nor are we trained to do so. So we're within parameters. We are also only using restraint as a method when a student is harmful to themselves or others. And it's a last resort. We try other methods of de-escalation prior to that. Does that help? Any questions? Okay, we're gonna stay at it.
And I know it's taken a lot of time.
Yes.
Lately, this has been really your focus.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Interpretation has been the hardest, trying to make sure we're trying to do the best with what we have, with what our rules are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On a much lighter note, I'll share with you that in the month of January, we're going to be offering to our staff a district-wide staff kindness challenge. We're excited about that. Kind of a nice way to kick off the new year in a positive note. And so today I met with, I think it was 2 administrators, 3 teachers, and 3 program assistants. And we're working together to design that challenge, and it'll be ready to go soon after the school year starts. So we're excited about that piece. And speaking of when the school year starts, just as a reminder, we're coming up on winter break. All the buildings will be closed during winter break. Should there be snow or bad weather prior to winter break or after winter break, we are ready for it. So just wanted to let you know that we have our plans in place regarding what happens then. And that is it for the superintendent's report. I know it was lengthy.
Hey, under the shorter reports,
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
the Equity and Inclusion Committee.
I'm the designated speaker because we had a small group in attendance, small but mighty. We did approve our norms of how we're working together, and so we had a good conversation about that. Our next meeting, we're going to be refocusing on the purpose that Christy had helped us begin at our last meeting, but we will be focusing and narrowing in on that. We completed our book study that we have been reading and had good discussion. The book study helps us have topics that come up that we can talk generally about, maybe that we hadn't considered yet in our system, but we need to be prepared for. So I value the conversation of talking from other people's learning through the book study, which is always good. The book was called We Got This, and it was by Cornelius Minor, was the author of the book. Our committee has established some small groups that have responsibilities. So instead of taking committee time, we've broken off into smaller groups to get assigned different roles. So we'll have more updates about those coming in the new year at our next meeting as well. Some of them are about some events that we're encouraging and going to be promoting. Some of them are about the sticker contest. One that I'm going to just drop, we're interested in thinking about having one district, one book, to have one topic of one book that we choose to have all students and staff read and discuss. And so we have some common experiences that have to do with equity and inclusion. We haven't chosen that book yet, but I'm just throwing it out there that maybe we would like the board maybe even to participate in reading the one district, one book. We're looking for a children's book that we can have good discussion starters from. So I'm just teasing a little bit that we're thinking about that. And from your reactions, I'm seeing that some of you would be interested and think that might be a good idea. So we were pretty excited about that idea. And that came up from one of the committee members, one district, one book, because we have that one district, one direction theme that we have. I like the connection as well.
Can I ask you to put something on your radar for community engagement? We've talked a few times about having someone in your committee take a look at the community engagement plan through the perspective of equity. It's just in draft form now, but when it is more finalized, is that something?
I'm sure even we could consider having another small group who would be, we have
Yeah.
active and interested people who would like to have another job or another duty or another responsibility to do between meetings. So I think that could be, I'm just making that, I'm not the full committee, but I think that could be a way that we organize that.
And I'm looking around too, is that my personal preference would be to have them be involved at the draft stage before it's finalized. Are you?
I'm sure that
Yeah, we
good
can do
with
that.
we can
that?
offer
Okay.
that up.
Any reason not to do that, or?
I think it makes sense to get involved sooner versus later.
Yeah, I do too. When there's decision-making happening about the plan. Okay.
We can certainly bring it to the committee, or we can send emails if we need a sooner volunteer than our next meeting, which is in January.
We draft the email?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to do that, and then I can just attach the plan as it stands right now, if you're good with that, if everyone's good with that.
Fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like that because one of the things that was came up in the one of the III workshops I attended was about how, putting the equity lens on everything we do.
Right.
So I think it's a great example of saying, okay, it seems like a really great idea, but let's make sure we're not unintentionally creating inequities anywhere by doing it and making sure all the voices are heard. So it's good.
From the get-go. Yeah.
Good practice. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll get an email to you. We meet
Benny.
next, or should I send it to you?
Anybody?
Well, you can send it to me. I actually
Okay, I'll
sit
send
on
it to you.
both committees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything from that?
I don't think so.
We did also hear some good information. I apologize, I didn't
That's all
share that Dr. Glickman had gone to a statewide committee and shared some of the information and invited more participants and shared it as a model of how more information is being learned.
All right.
I also heard great feedback about the book list that was put together from teachers.
I'm working on that.
That they're excited to know that that's part of our work.
Are you using the PLC model that you've used before, the professional learning community, is that correct? Is that PLC?
Yes.
Are you using that model in?
We're using many of the tenets of it to have norms to help us guide our work and a purpose statement and then subgroups too. So it's similar, but it is a learning community for sure. I would say that's one of my favorite learning communities that I've heard some other people echo
That was a
because
great
it's
night.
that's really the focus of professional learning communities.
Right.
In that we're all learners, we're all
In this together.
In this together, we can learn from each other, and it is one of my favorite opportunities to have those conversations. So in that sense, absolutely, it's a professional learning community model.
Okay. Do you have a resource that I can look at to kind of get an
Yes.
overview of it?
For sure.
So one is specifically that might inform the community engagement.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anything else? My hips just been going back and forth. Policy committee, so for those that walked in, we were trying to get through the policies that we had. We had a long list at the beginning, a couple weeks ago. We got through most of them, not all of them. So you should be seeing some of those come through. We have one that we need to adopt tonight.
We don't.
In January, sorry.
January. I mean, yeah.
So that'll be one that we'll have to get done. Other than that, we have a long time to get the rest of them done.
Yes, and there are many more to come. So we shortened the list already, and then we still didn't get through all of them in 45 minutes. So, yeah, it's a big policy year.
All right, so next I need approval to, motion to approve the consent agenda, including your addendum that you have for the personnel report.
So moved.
Second. Braden. Aye. Nash.
Aye.
LaCroy.
Aye.
Strack.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Mack.
Aye.
Weedman.
Aye. All right, so next we're on to action items, and the first thing we will have is a presentation from John on the tax levy, and a motion to approve the tax levy after that.
Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. We want to hear your presentation, but first we want to have cake.
We do?
Yes, where's
We
the
do.
cake?
All right.
Might have something to do with these on the desk.
Yes, thank you,
tax levy
Sue.
Sorry.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Sue. So,
Cake.
I'm gonna put it like this. We are grateful to and honor our school board members at all times of the year. Throughout the state of Illinois, many school board members were being specifically honored in the month of November. In District 46, school board members are being specifically honored this year in December. And so you all have in front of you a certificate with our great thanks. And we know, number one, that you're not getting paid, and that we voted for you not to get paid, right, at III most recently, and that the hours that you put into the work that you do are plentiful. I'm not going to say that it's a thankless job, because I actually hope that you do feel thanked, and that you internally feel the difference you're making for your community. But we all want to say thank you, and we want to say thank you with cake. So can we take a cake break? Excellent. Yes. Thank you to Sue for the mouthing of the word cake to me.
So typically,
We'll add
we
this.
typically get
All right, after a wonderful and lovely piece of cake, we are now ready for the sugar crash of talking ever so briefly about a tax levy. So we've already gone over a lot of the pieces of the tax levy at the last board meeting. The biggest pieces, so for tonight, that really just leaves us to discuss the finalized 2019 levy. Levy variables, again, we know what CPI was, we know what last year's extension was. What we still don't know, and we wouldn't know until March, is what our estimated, our equalized assessed value will be and what the new property will be. So because of that, we can say that we know CPI increased 1.9%, and last year's capped extension was $28.5 million. That gives us an estimated, and from the property reports we've received from the county so far, we're estimating a 3.66% increase in our equalized assessed value still. New property is still assumed at $3.5 million. So to make sure that we capture every single piece of that, let's talk a little bit about the extension estimate. This is what we believe the county will finalize, what they will give to us at the end in March. This is, again, based off of that whole property tax extension limitation law calculation. So our estimated extension is going to be about 36.9, almost $37 million. And that's based, again, on that rate of inflation plus a little bit of new property to give us a total increase of 2.4% over last year's levy. So even though that's what we estimate the extension will be, our levy is going to be, our levy is going to be a little bit more than that at a 37.5. This was per discussion with the board at the last Board of Education meeting. That's an increase of 4.5%. And again, just want to specify the difference between the request, which is our levy, which you're approving now, and the extension, which is what they will extend to us as the maximum allowed by law. The whole reason why we ask for more than what we estimate the extension to be would be if there are any fluctuations in new property or equalized assessed value. And we're doing this again, as you could see from the previous slide. We have about half of the known variables set. We don't know what some of those variables will be. I also wanted to talk, we didn't talk as much about this at the last board meeting, but we are going to be applying for the property tax relief grant. Or actually, that will be before you for a motion for adoption if that's your desire. Just wanted to point out that there's going to be a couple of changes this year. Last year, it was a 1-year abatement, so you abated it for 1 year, you got money from the state in that same levy year, and then after that, your extension returned to normal. This year, there was a change in the law. Now you have to make that abatement for 2 years instead of just 1 year. Financially, it still works out in your interest in the sense that they don't hold those abatements against you in future levies. But it's interesting that they're making you now abate it for 2 years instead of just the 1 year. That being said, I just want to point out again that last year we were ranked 156th out of 851, so obviously the property tax the property tax relief grant is working in terms of there are districts that were ranked higher than us that are now going to be ranked lower thanks to the additional funding from the state. So we are moving up in the rankings, but we are still ranked 121st. And with only $50 million to go around, there's quite a few people a few districts who would be in front of us if they apply for it. So,
John, what is that a ranking of?
So they take your, they basically take your property tax rate, your limiting rate, and they compare it with all the other districts in the county and in the state, and they compare that. They then also do a factor on that of if you're an elementary district or a unit district or a high school district. And that's how they kind of get to where we are. So they're basically saying that you're the 121st highest ranked, highest property tax rate in Illinois.
John, do you know if our ranking is at all connected to, because 127 did get the grant and we're the same taxing body, are those related at all or no?
No.
Okay.
So the high school is even after that, they're actually an interesting case in that they're still ranked higher than us even after they got the property tax extension, the property tax relief grant. So
didn't we talk about it last year where it had something to do with the vagaries of the formula and how they weighted the high school districts versus elementary versus unit?
Yes.
Thank you.
I still have my issues with how they've decided to rank those, but you're right. for some reason, in my opinion, it seems like it more heavily weighs a high school district tax rate than it does an elementary district, in my opinion. Which, questions?
On the property tax abatement grant, what is the dollar amount that say we're eligible for, and what do we have to give up on top of it? Because if I remember seeing it right in the paperwork, it's $3.2 million is what we would abate, but they would only give us $2.8 million back. So we would lose $400,000 a year for 2 years, so we lose another $800,000, and we're not gonna make up. Right?
Theoretically, so roughly that's correct. So it's not a dollar for dollar grant. So if we abate the $3.2 million, the state isn't agreeing to give you $3.2 million back. They're only agreeing to give you $2.8 million. The point would be, the reason why this is in your interest theoretically is that becomes part of your base funding minimum as state aid. So as you go into future years, that becomes the new base amount that they keep adding on to. So you abate your taxes for 2 years, you lose the $800,000. However, that $2.8 million now becomes a steady part of your base that you're guaranteed pending any prorations. You're guaranteed from the state in perpetuity. So it kind of advances. Right now we're at 64% of adequacy. It would advance us on that scale, so we would be closer to adequacy thanks to the state. And eventually your levy would catch back up in terms of, in 3 years, you could still reference the amount that would have been able to levy it had you not abated it for the past 2 years. So it is one-time losses of that money, but it is helping catch you up in the short term. You're getting additional money from the state in that time. So in year 3, you're not abating that anymore, and you're getting your $3.2 million back, but then you also have $2.8 additional million from the state as part of your base funding.
So over a 3-year period, you're saying that net gain of
$2 million roughly.
versus like the short-term loss of $400,000 for 2 years.
Correct.
For a year. What impact is that going to have on our budget? We're already really tight and already having to look at some difficult conversations as far as staffing numbers. That's just, in my opinion, that's just going to make it a little harder.
Absolutely. So it obviously would hurt for the next 2 years. And that's a decision that would have to be weighed, is if it's worth the next 2 years of having those hard conversations for the reduced levy in exchange for that additional money in year 3.
And you don't think we're going to get it anyway, correct?
Correct. I find it very hard to imagine. Based upon the numbers last year, I think they went through the top 20 or 30 districts, and we were ranked 156th. Granted, we're closer to the top this year, but we're still not. There would have to be a lot of districts that turn down the money ahead of us in order for us to receive the grant.
What would be the circumstances in which it would be turned down?
That's a great question. Situations like ours, I think, would be a good example. To Jim's point of we're in a very cash-strapped position, I could see districts saying in the short term, we just can't afford this. However, in my opinion, trying to think of the long term of this, it would be hard for me to think, knowing where we're going in terms of tier rankings and assuming that the state is able to continue to fund evidence-based funding how they've been funding it, you're ending up in year 3 with a pretty large bump. So it hurts probably pretty bad for 2 years. But in year 3, if we were to get it, you might end up in a much better financial position.
So, just so I'm clear, so the money the $400,000 a year that we would lose, or however you want to phrase that, we'd basically just be spending that out of fund balance.
Correct.
For those 2 years, or we'd be spending more out of fund balance than we thought we would have been.
Yeah, you essentially have 2 options. You either spend it out of fund balance or you make decisions to not spend out of fund balance.
Right. But then we get the $2 million after the 2 years, which can catch
Correct.
all that back up. And Okay.
Your levy would return to normal, and you would get $2.8 million additional from the state.
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm picturing the graphs we've looked at regarding our projections, and that downward turn is getting much more dramatic in year three, right? So I think the next couple of years weren't as serious, and then, so then we have that nice bump with the $2.6 million in year three. Did I have that right?
Yeah, correct.
But I mean,
Yes, in terms of financial projections.
Does it coincide with anything else with the bond? I just don't remember the bonds rolling off or any of the debt repayments or anything.
All of our debt payments are currently structured so that by the end of fiscal year 2026, you would have all the bonds come off. But we've structured the bonds in such a way that they're pretty level. So they're about $7.6 million a year for the next, 7 years, next 7 fiscal years. So there wouldn't be any dips this year that we could kind of take that out of, so to speak.
And if I'm understanding Lynn correctly, right when the deficit's really going to be painful, that's when the extra EBF money would come in. Was I hearing you correctly or no?
That's when your
Okay.
levy gets back to
Right.
normal, so you're not abating it.
Okay. And
So, correct me if I'm wrong, John. We abate back $3.2 million after we levy it, right?
Correct.
It's not that we lower that, it's not that we lower our levy, we abate it back after. And then the next year, what do we use as the base?
So we had some conversations about this with legal counsel and with the county to confirm this, because it was the change in the law, right? They changed it from 1 year to 2 years. So I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. We confirmed with the county. Their interpretation is you would keep levying at that same rate, and you would just, the next course of action would be, if you were to receive the grant this year, in February you would pass a resolution abating the 3.2 million, and in the next year you would still be able to levy based upon the amount of money that you originally levied at this time, based upon this extension. So they wouldn't hold your abatement as, okay, well, you reduced your taxes by 3.2 million. That means next year it's 3.2 million lower, and then whatever CPI is. And then I clarified, okay, well, that's great for the first year, but what about the second year? Does this continue to carry? And they said, no, our understanding is you would continue to be able to levy at whatever your normal extension would have been. They don't count the abatement against what your aggregate levy would be in their calculation.
Do we need this decision tonight?
I would too.
And run a few scenarios, make sure I have it straight before I say yes or no. When do we have to have this in?
January 4th.
Now, there was a time at which we thought about bringing you a revised resolution.
The other thing that we could say is this option is still available to you. You could theoretically, the state would be very sad if you did this, but you theoretically could adopt this resolution tonight. The resolution isn't required by law to have. It's just the covering of like, yes, the board wants to go in this direction. You could theoretically, if you decide against this, if you get more information and decide, you know what, we decide not to do this anymore, you could in February vote down the abatement. And then at that point, this wouldn't take effect for you.
So in other words, if you got the money turned down, is that?
Yeah, so the state would say, congratulations, you've got the award. In order to receive the money, you need to pass this resolution to abate. And at that point, the board would have to take action to either pass or reject the abatement resolution.
Me personally, would like to see a couple of scenarios of how that plays out over the next 2 years. To see where the money actually lands. Make sure that we're making a sound decision. Again, at the end of year 3, you get that positive, but it's that 2-year time frame in between, and that worries me.
John, do you know how, if we were to be awarded the money, do you know how long we have to
So you have until, the deadline is typically around January 4th, and then you have until the end of the month to accept it, so we'd be able to, even at that meeting, make a determination before. But once they've, once you've applied for it, they let you know at the end of January that, you apply for it at the beginning of January, they let you know by the end of January who's awarded it, and then that's when in the February board meeting takes the action of like, okay, now here's your responsibility to abate.
So if we bring this, so you could vote on this resolution now for us to apply, and then we could bring you, I don't know exactly what you want, Jim, for us to show, but if you can, articulate what you want us to show, then there can be more conversation.
Well, we have to back out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you wanted to back out, the opportunity to back out would be at the February meeting, voting down the abatement.
That will probably be that.
I'm just very skeptical about losing money at a point in time in this district where we can't lose any more.
And again, it's probably not the issue.
Right.
Probably not the issue.
Sooner or later, we can find where we might.
Like I said, we moved up 35 in the rankings, so.
121st with a bullet.
All right, so do all these get approved as one, or are we doing these separately? Do you need a motion for each one of these? Or is this one package?
I believe it's one package, and the only one that would be different would be the property.
Okay, so the levy includes the motion to approve the levy includes resolution regarding the amounts necessary to be levied for the year 2019, the resolution to levy certain special taxes for special education district and IRMF purposes, resolution to levy working cash tax, and the resolution to levy special education tax.
Correct. It is separate items. I love this.
Okay.
So we need one for each one of those?
So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, can I have a motion to approve the resolution regarding the amounts necessary to be levied for the year 2019?
So moved?
Second.
Weedman,
Yes?
Miller,
Yes.
Mack,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Braden. Yes. LaCroy,
Aye.
Strack,
Aye.
All right. Resolution to levy certain taxes, certain special taxes for special education district IRMF purposes.
So moved.
Strack,
Aye.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Braden. Aye. Nash,
Aye.
Mack,
Aye.
Miller. Aye. Weedman.
Yes. Resolution to levy working cash tax.
So moved.
Second.
Weedman,
Aye.
Miller. Aye. Mack,
Aye.
Nash,
Aye.
Braden.
Aye.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Strack.
Aye.
All right, and a resolution to levy the special education tax.
So moved.
Second.
Strack,
Aye.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Braden.
Aye.
Nash,
Aye.
Mack,
Aye.
Miller. Aye. Weedman.
Aye. All right, next is a motion to approve the application for the property tax relief grant.
So moved.
I'll second.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Braden.
Aye.
Strack,
Aye.
Miller. Aye. Mack,
Aye.
Weedman.
Aye.
Nash.
Aye.
All right, the next is a presentation on threat assessment. After that, we'll.
No, that's okay. That's probably hard to hear. No. It's okay. Hello? With these things, I like yelling them. You've been turning me down. Okay, good. Quite vocal. Sorry, I was just going to wait for it.
Not coming up?
Oh, we got No, no, no. John does it.
Oh, he does it then.
We do EGA.
Just stand here and look at it.
Sorry.
I am going to be talking about the student safety and threat assessment procedures, but it looks like this in your packet. I'm not going to be going off of this. It's going to be off a slideshow, but I wanted to I'll be referencing everything that's in this document. All right. Up to you guys. No pressure. All right, so I just said that. In August, specifically the 23rd, of this year, Public Act 101-0455 was put in place, approved, and that requires school districts to create threat assessment procedures that will be then adopted by a school board. So specifically, we are required by December 23rd of this year to have this adopted by the school board, and then a district team established by February 22nd. We are a little ahead of the curve, and I will describe those because we created our team already, and I'll describe that on the next page. This is really to target violence prevention and really have a common, consistent procedure across our district in how we treat identified threats, not only to others, but also for self-harm or injurious behavior. In our district, we have a district team already identified. These are the roles that are required per the law. An administrator will be me. We have a teacher on board. We do not have school counselors in our district, so I've connected with the high school district and we adopted one for this purpose. A school psychologist, a social worker, and we will be contacting the Grays Lake Police Department to participate in our annual meeting. We are required to have this team, but it really doesn't define any parameters for what that team's function is. So when we had a small group team build this original threat assessment procedure guideline, we determined that we were going to have a district team to really globally look at this procedure from a district global perspective, but we would also have school teams established by building to really deal with the actual threats that come up through their student population. Please note that the Director of Pupil Services and the Superintendent are also part of that process as it relates to the needs of the student. We have our first meeting coming up in January 7th to be exact, to start the process of really looking at this and seeing if there's any adjustments that we need to make. But this is our initial procedure. In that packet, it's broken down in really 3 subsections, one being the threat assessment steps that we're going to take. The goal of that is to determine the level of threat and then take action. So essentially, an identified threat is brought up. It is brought to a social worker or a psychologist, and they will assess that using the documents that's in that packet, and then determine the level of threat that actual threat is. And then therefore, The social worker, principal, and psychologist will follow the appropriate interventions defined in that procedural manual. They're all documented in our paperwork as well as kept for record keeping, not in the cumulative folder, but in the student records in both our pupil services office and in our related services records, so they can track that data over time if necessary. The second section of that is a self-harm or suicide assessment steps, with that major goal being to determine the level of need and take action. It's very common to, or similar to the threat assessment in that we have an identified concern, the social worker or psychologist then uses that guide to make a determination of whether there's intent or means to do, or plan per se to do any self-harm or suicide. And then they will follow the risk assessment template to determine what's the most appropriate intervention to support that student. And sometimes that's seeking outside resources as appropriate depending on the level, and that's with both threats. We want to make sure we're involving authorities as appropriate, outside mental health agencies as appropriate, and that kind of thing. And again, all steps are documented on the self-harm and suicide assessment documentation and kept for record keeping. Parents will get a copy of this documentation when we do an assessment as well. All of the components within both of those threat assessments were researched by that initial team. We gathered evidence from some of the greatest gurus. We found that Virginia is like the leader in the model. So we really adopted a lot of their templates as well as their procedures. And we also evaluated nearby districts that already had some procedures in place, and we created our own. The last section in this document are the safety plans. These were created actually last year. In special education, we know that we have functional behavior assessments, or we call those FBAs, and then we create behavior plans, or BIPs. But with that, there are procedural safeguards. There's processes with evaluations per se, and doing that. But we also know students show up the next day and have an identified need, and we need to make sure we have a plan in place. So we created 3 structures of a safety plan for various types of needs and students. So the school team has a plan when the student shows up the next day. So that serves as an interim plan, or it can be a temporary plan until a more formal plan needs to take place. That is it. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Heather, I have
Yes, ma'am.
a couple questions. So is the parent notification for self-harm/suicide only, or is it to make, well, that's part 1 on that.
Yes. So there's a formal document for that only. In the threat assessment procedure, there are steps laid out in that plan, in the document that you have, that we do contact the family to involve them in the process. Depending on the level of threat, the approach, and how you involve or when you involve the parent is defined differently.
Okay, and I'm going to assume, depending on the threat, then the broader school community would then be notified.
Correct, as appropriate. Especially if there is an identified threat. Sometimes we find that some comments are flippant. Sometimes there's a joke. Sometimes there's a threat of harm or threat of something that's identified, but it's really non-credible. So we really are meticulous, and that's when we involve me as well as our superintendent in making sure we're being real intentional about how and what we communicate to our families and our community. And the board. We want you to know everything as much as possible. So Dr. Clem has been very insistent on getting that information to you pretty quickly. So no surprises.
Okay, and then just last question.
Mhm.
Does the plan account for the transition back? So I know that you said there's a planning meeting that takes place, I'm assuming, with administrators to
Yes.
talk through what to expect, but how is the student then integrated back into the classroom?
That is part of that safety plan, actually. We've embedded that actually in a few scenarios where we've had to do this loosely from not having a plan in place. We bring that student in, we bring the parent in often. Most often they participate in that process willingly, and we create a plan to reintegrate back. whether that's an intervention plan with more related services or a teacher, some restorative practices. So we're continuing to build on that layer because that's really important for that student's well-being as well as the other students who may be fearful or confused or concerned.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you,
Guys,
everyone. Oh, yes.
Is there any room for equity in this or unconscious bias? I'm thinking back on my own teaching and a specific experience where this was an issue and my response to it and what I learned from that, which is kind of a humorous story. But I'm just wondering if there's PD that's involved with this so that the teams that are assessing the threat are familiar with their unconscious bias.
That's a really good question. I wouldn't say formally in here, absolutely, it's not written in our plan.
Right.
We are always talking about it. It's our new forever conversation, and it's exciting to have. We're talking about it as a leadership team regularly. I'm bringing that, or principals are bringing that back to their teams and their building to make sure that race and culture and religion and differences are always on the table for discussion and consideration. We want to make sure we're forward thinking in that. So loosely, yes,
It's not in your okay.
but certainly not written into the plan itself.
Okay.
I'm wondering,
Mm-hmm.
if there's an opportunity to just then do a look back
Yeah.
every so often.
Mhm.
And there was a workshop that we went to where the speaker, who was a retired superintendent, said, if I can look at the stack of reports and just, this was discipline, but, in the same arena, and I can tell you the race of the student without looking at the report, then we have a problem.
Yes.
And so I think just maybe, doing like an after action every year or something, just saying,
Yeah.
hey, does
What are we learning?
who was ended up being within this program, and how does that or not reflect the actual student makeup, just
Yeah.
to make sure nothing's unintentional that's happening.
It's a really good point because there's but there's a slight layer in that we are already doing. Through PBIS, we collect Swiss data, and that's embedded in the data that we're collecting. So we do evaluate that in a formal process by building with their school teams when they're looking at that data. I also collect certain data for incident reports and things like that, and I have to report to the CRD, Civil Rights Department, CRCD or something like that. DC. And I have to report those incidences, and it's getting actually more detailed in the type of student that they're asking about. It gets down to race, it gets down to gender, what identified EL plan or IEP or 504 plan and that kind of stuff. So that is, yes.
That's great.
Yes, so that is there. Could we do better always? For sure.
I also wanted to mention, we brought this to you as something for you to vote on, but in reality, what we've learned is that the language is not specific that a board needs to vote on a plan, just that it has to be adopted by the school district. And the reason I bring that up is that does give us flexibility to continue to make some changes to the plan without continuing bringing it back to you. Not that we don't want to bring things back to you, but, I mean, you raise a really great point, Christy, and, the committee's getting together in early January, they're gonna be looking at the plan. Maybe there is some language that we can add or consider, so, are you comfortable if we make changes as we go, not bringing it back to you each time?
I'd just love to hear once a year,
How's it going?
how's it going?
What's going on? Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And I'm sure Lynn will drive some of that timeline for us. So we'll do that. And then I want to also add that this document needs to go up on our website as well. So we're going to embed that in our pupil services website. Somewhere on there we'll figure out. Leslie has the magic, so she'll figure that out with us.
And I just want to add, as recently as today, I had a conversation with the principal where there was a situation. They did a threat assessment. He was using the language of the plan.
Sure was.
Very much, and, was really, talking through everything they went through. It's very kind of comforting to hear people use the process.
So, to that point, Lynn, what process is in place to evaluate, like, the compliance of the schools with the new plan? So what I heard Heather say is that there's a lot of intentionality around understanding like the demographics and profiles of students coming through, but in terms of are the administrators living into the threat assessment policy? You know, what type of internal controls, if you will, checks and balances to ensure that that's happening?
Well, certainly, all of our principals know that when there's something significant happening, depending on what it is, they need to contact one of us. And so that'll be one of our regular questions, questions or listen for as to whether they're using the language of the threat assessment. I'm not sure that we're going to be in a situation where we are regularly reporting out at our administrative meetings necessarily. But if we're starting to see that people aren't using it, that would be another matter. Keep in mind too that there are controls in place because this turns on a whole bunch of people, right? So it's the principals, social workers, the school site, so it's all those people accountable for using this plan.
And I can say too, the principals are finding some safety in it because it gives some structure to the decision making that they have. So they're super grateful for it. In fact, they had they requested that I go back and personally train the social workers and the psychs on a few occasions to make sure that they're familiar and proficient with the plan as well. They really buy into having some structure to what they're doing. It makes them feel safe.
Because the problems already present themselves. So
Right.
they're used to needing to figure out what they need to do. Now they have something that gives them structure of what to do.
Thank you, guys.
I know. I know.
So are we just adopting this? Do we need to change the language from approve to adopt?
Yeah, I think maybe just adopt it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think we'd have to do anything now, it just, other than,
I think it has to be
Yeah.
adopted, right?
I mean, what we came to, yeah, I don't think it needs to be approved. It just needs to be adopted. The language, Chris, remember when we were at the workshop last week? They said, the district needs to adopt. So we are together, the district.
Can't hurt if we do it.
No, it's not going to hurt.
So I'd like to make a motion to adopt the threat assessment procedures.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Braden,
Aye.
Strack,
aye?
Miller, Mack,
Aye.
Weedman,
Aye.
Nash.
Aye.
All right, so now we're up to unfinished business. The first one is discussion of an insurance advisory committee. I believe we would be looking to figure out what the structure is going to look like as far as board participation and union participation, correct?
Yeah.
So, anybody that'd be interested in serving on the insurance advisory committee for work with John and the board, and I mean, I can if
I can too.
anybody else interested.
I might as well put this good old insurance,
Well, then you,
Yeah.
I'll back out. She can do it.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Okay, do we know how many we want to do?
Well, keep in mind if you have more than
Three,
two.
it's a board meeting.
Yeah.
I can back out. That's fine.
Yeah.
Sure?
Yep.
Okay. So,
Okay.
we-
So, we had talked about having, so I'm not necessarily thinking about numbers of people, I'm thinking about roles.
Mhm.
So for sure you want your director, your CSBO, for sure you want your director of HR.
Mhm.
I think it would make sense to have at least one other administrator. It doesn't necessarily need to be me. It could be a principal, could be somebody else. So, and And so that's 3, with the potential of maybe a 4th, because I'm wondering if you might want at least 4 teachers or support staff members, so that you know, kind of as a, more people involved in it. So maybe 4 administrators. So then you have 2 board members, 4 administrators, and 4 staff members. That seems pretty reasonable.
Okay. And then we need to work with our insurance broker so that she can try and attend, she or he, right? In the past, it's been a she.
It's currently a she, right?
Okay.
Mhm.
So that she can come to there and present the information to the whole group at once, so that everybody gets the same information at the same time.
Yes. So we'll start working on that. We'll get, I don't know if we're thinking we can get something pulled together for January. It might be the beginning of February.
Okay.
But we'll get working on it.
Yeah, and I guess if we reach out to the union presidents to find out who their interested parties is to sit on their for their behalf.
Yep.
That way that they get their choice of who they're going to put there.
Yep.
Okay.
Sound good? So 2, 4, and 4?
You want any community members at large?
I don't think there's much of a use for it at this point, only because it's kind of internal, I guess, for that matter. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed either to looking at if there's other companies or brokers out there, if that's something that we want to go down that path to or not.
The person I have in mind is an HR executive. Was at Baxter. She's not there anymore, but she's vice president. It's not Mrs. Smith.
Right.
Different educator couple. I'm not married to it either way. I'm just.
Right. I guess we might have to run that through, maybe just have a little communication with the 2 unions to see if they're agreeable with that or not.
On one hand, I'm thinking that we wouldn't want to turn away anyone who has talents to lend, but on the other hand, this is kind of a compensation element too that
Right,
may
there's a
be
little confidentiality in that.
Yes.
open to a wider audience. It's a thought.
Okay, I think I missed part of the conversation. Say it
No,
again.
so Christy was asking, she has a friend that is an ex-HR executive with obviously experience in this, and we're trying to figure out if we want an outside person from the public at large to participate in this or not. And as Jason says, it is a pay and benefit compensation type of thing.
Making it somewhat confidential.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the truth is, the outside person is the broker. I mean, they're the one who comes with expertise. So, I have to admit, I've not heard of bringing in someone who's not affected by it or closely linked to,
Right.
to the insurance.
We probably need to make sure that we have all, what do you want to call it, classifications of staff? So we have PSRP, we have the Federation of Teachers, and then we have admin, we have non-union staff.
Yeah, that's what we were just talking about. So we could add, like an exempt employee who's not an administrator.
Something like that, so that all aspects are kind of,
Yep. That may add one more person.
right.
Okay. Exempt. Okay. We'll get working on it.
All right. Jason made a request to discuss a finance committee.
I did, and when we last met, when we were talking about a couple of different committee ideas, we talked about the idea of creating some sort of a template to propose a committee. And to that end, over Thanksgiving break, I put together a proposal for this committee, which I promptly neglected to send to you all before this meeting. But I would like to review what I've put together briefly and promise to send it to you after. So I found a template for another purpose, repurposed it for this, and basically it's just got a couple of sections. It's, you know, what's the purpose of the committee, who are the stakeholders involved, a few of the envisioned activities, and what does success look like. So that's the format. I'm interested to hear your feedback on it when I send it out to you. But the committee, I envision it being a school finances committee, not just a finance committee. That's a little anodyne, but the idea of a school finances committee envisions the idea to me of, got a revenue component. We have a revenue scarcity in our district. It can include all sorts of different elements around school finances. I envision the stakeholders participating to be interested Board of Education members, administrators, including certainly CSBO, probably the superintendent, bargaining unit members. I would love to see people at the table who were interested taxpayers, people involved in local units of government like village trustees, and if we could get them elected state representatives and or their designees.
Oh, you're going big.
I mean, anyone whose ear we would love to bend on a regular basis. The activities that I envision for this committee would be regular updates on the district finances, almost like a monthly report on, hey, here's the state of the books. Discussions on financial projections as necessary. Brainstorming revenue enhancement ideas and or cost savings. And this is an interesting one that I really think ought to be a big part of it, because I saw the energy around this district in the last few months, and I think that if some of that energy got put towards what would really make a difference, which would be advocating for public school funding initiatives at the state level, if we could harness a fraction of that energy and put it in places where it would really help, I think this committee would be wildly successful. And success to me for this committee looks like a more constructive bargaining unit negotiations and things like passage of favorable legislation in Springfield, or even, you know, initiatives locally that we could get done that would enhance our revenue opportunities. So I will share this with you all. And I guess I do have a further question is, I've never been around when one of these committees was born. What needs to happen for it to happen?
I think we as a board need to agree to make it happen.
Yeah,
I think, to make the finance committee. I mean, that's how it's kind of worked in the past, is we say we think we need a committee on finance, and we say, bibbidi bobbidi boo, we now have a committee on finance.
As long as we have board consensus to do it.
Yeah.
In the past, I've heard the distinction between what is a board committee and what's a superintendent committee, and is there a difference in the way those two types of committees are birthed?
Yeah, it's more difference in how they have to, in meeting requirements and that sort of thing. But I don't think there's a difference in how they're formed.
No, I don't think so.
All right, I'll send you my committee proposal template, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, and the next one is an update on the Community Engagement Committee.
Yeah, so we met last week and discussed the value and the purpose of the community engagement plan. And when I say we, it's Stephen, Mac, and Lynn and I. And talked about the components or potential components for a dashboard that would be up on the website, including, we hope, some sort of financial update. So if we did go with a monthly update, if it could be in a format that could be just available to people to click on a link and see.
I'm a bad judge of what's
Overlap.
available to people in that regard. You'll have to let me know.
It's just a pilot. We can find out. And then we also talked about meeting in January to look at the overlap between the strategic planning process and the community engagement process. And I'm making a Venn diagram, I think, kind of what the compelling invitation is, so that we can start a committee and invite people into that process. from the get-go. I met with Kristen, as I mentioned earlier today, and tried to discern where we might have overlap with the foundation. She's the chairperson for the Community Awareness Committee in the foundation level. And we brainstormed some ideas for that too. So that's where we're at. Not ready for parameters yet, but we're getting there.
All right, next is new business, discussion of Ed Red membership.
So, Jason, you set me up really well. Thank you. I made copies at 6:15. So I beat you.
Well done.
So if you all, you know what? I'm sorry. That's for everybody. If you all will remember, back in September, we brought up the idea of EdRed, and we're coming back to it now. So the history of it is Lynn introduced this resource to us as something that she had felt that had been a really good investment and something that was super useful to her prior district. And then Christy and I were able to meet with the chairperson of EdRed, Sarah Hartwick, the executive director, as well as one of Lynn's former board members who sits on the EdRed board, to just hear more about what it is and how it might benefit us. So we're circling, and then I went to their kickoff luncheon earlier in the fall, as well as their guests, to kind of see what it was all about. So what I thought I'd do is just give you the materials that I have, talk to you a little bit about what it is and how I think it would benefit us, what would be the value for the cost, and then hear your questions. So the first page that I sent over is their mission, beliefs, and vision and strategic goals. And so, Jason, I will not pay you later because we are unpaid. But basically everything that you were talking about in terms of the root cause and the root solution being at the state level is also reflected in EdRed. So you'll see here, number one, that number three there, one of their beliefs is that the state must provide adequate financial support for all schools. Funding should be stable, reliable, and predictable. And all state mandates should be fully funded. So that's a really important, especially if we're thinking about, mandates that come down that this district is expected to just sort of accommodate either like within the school day, so then you have to find in an already crowded school day 15 minutes to do this, 15 minutes to do that, or things that cost money like cursive curricula, et cetera. And so you can see where their beliefs around how we get this business of education done are very aligned with what we're, I think, trying to do in the district. And you see their vision and goals here to communicate with member districts on the process and pending legislation. So they are a window into what's happening in Springfield. Sarah has an extensive background there and testifies in front of committee and in front of the full legislature very often on lots of issues. She's very well connected and well respected in Springfield. And then she's also reaching out in terms of state agencies, advocacy groups, et cetera. So what EdRed does is provides an advocacy for us in Springfield as a group of specifically suburban school districts. And there's a list, the last page is actually the member list, so you can kind of see who else is involved. It differs from IASB and those legislative updates we get because it is very specifically focused on our region. The state, IASB is focused on the full needs of the state. This EdRed is focused on what this group of schools wants to be focused on, in particular needs that we would experience in this region. But if you go look at the list, you also see it's not necessarily all North Shore or all, there's a very diverse list of school districts here as well. So it's not it's a diverse group that's coming together around some common goals that we have based on where we're located and our specific concerns in the area. If you look then in the middle page, you'll kind of see what the membership includes. Of course, there's advocacy, the legislative updates. Basically what you would do would be assign someone to be the EdRed liaison, and I'd be willing to do that. And then maybe even liaison to the finance committee, because it seems like there's a lot of information that would be useful to that committee. They have monthly meetings, to go to those and make sure that that the board gets the information that's out there about what's happening in Springfield. But there are also, communications that come directly to the entire board as well as to district staff that can be helpful as well. The prices for us would be $3,500 for the year. So, in thinking about fiscal responsibility, I wanted to make sure that I could articulate a return on that investment to you. I believe there's bottom line impact of that dollar amount, and I believe it's the first time that a state mandate is either funded or amended so that we're not in the hook for a $20,000 curriculum to do something the state wants us to do. It pays for itself right there. So to me, clearly what they're doing is saying to legislators, some of whom have the same intentions that we do, who really want to make schools better, and they think the way to do that is to pass a law, but they don't necessarily understand what the unintended consequences of that legislation are on districts, especially districts like us who are cash strapped, to say, not just we're going to vote you down, but more we understand the intent behind this. How can we get this done in a way that can actually have the intent that you want it to have without putting school districts in sort of an undue burden situation to implement what you'd like to do. So, what are your questions? Yeah.
So, was she able to give you a list of what successful things they've been able to get passed down at the state level that makes it impactful?
They actually, the big one for the last couple of years was Sarah was actually testified several times with evidence-based funding, and they were actually able to influence how that legislation got built, specifically around the idea that no schools, it was going to be always an add-on, and there wasn't going to be some schools were going to get less in order to have the other schools get more. They were actually helped formulate the way, that the baseline. That's right. Yeah, that's probably the big one. I also have here one copy of their latest, one of their newsletters, and some of these. The General Assembly passed AB 62. This is from June. Appropriations for school construction and appropriations for projects in legislatures' home districts. And then there's a task force on how to distribute that money. EdRed is working to ensure that suburban school districts are represented on the task force. So they're, in every bill that's out there, they're kind of making sure that the things that are yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's a whole list here if you want to look at just kind of an example of what they send out and how they've, the role that they're playing in a bunch of different legislation that's out there. Yeah, and it's a dialogue, so basically we tell them what is important to us and they kind of look at the membership and decide what they're going to take on, but it's an ongoing dialogue that's interactive to make sure that they understand what we think is most important for them to represent.
Do they get involved in legislation that might not be discretely education-based, like Fair Tax Illinois, for instance? Do they have a position on that? And
Yeah, here's the Property Tax Relief Act. They have, the idea that, it doesn't have an impact to school funding.
okay.
Yeah.
That's their nexus.
Yeah. Christy, go ahead.
Okay, just to take the success rate question a little bit further, do they publish in any of the materials you have, like specific dollars that they were able to give back to any of their member districts as a result of their advocacy work?
They might. Let me check and see. I'd be happy to forward that to everybody. Yep.
So one of the things that came up when I was with Keith this past week was the idea of he's tracking usage, so energy usage, and on that Energy Star portfolio, there's a section at the top that talks about the price of utilities. Do you know if there's any legislation that's talking about looking for ways to manage utility costs? Because they're supposed to increase pretty significantly in the next few years.
I don't personally, but that would be a great example of how to use this resource, would be to contact them and say what is out there, and is it something that the membership might be interested in getting more information on or taking, having some influence on.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I presume this annual subscription would probably come out of the board budget, right?
Do we have it in the board budget?
So, Sue and John, what I'm remembering is that last year it wasn't fully spent out. before budget. But if you want, because you're going to bring that to vote
Next month.
we can give you an update on where your budget is, along with information about last year's budget. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay, so that you look at your checkbook before you spend any
Good.
money. That seems like a good idea.
Check and make sure we have it.
Uh-huh.
Good idea.
Is that a use it or lose it, or does it roll over? Is it?
We have a new budget every year,
Okay.
so yeah, no, it doesn't.
I'll send out the answer to Tanika's question. I'll make sure Jim will send it out to you guys sometime this month before we.
Yeah, if you send it to Lynn, then she'll just send it to everybody.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Christy, can I ask one more thing? Brad Schneider introduced some legislator about funding professional development for teachers. I'm curious about that too, if Ed
Okay,
Red
yeah,
is
I can
involved
look
with
into
that.
it.
Thank you.
Yep. PD funding.
Next is the first look at the following board policies,
But really not all of them,
but only some of them.
but only some of them.
And only one of them we have to adopt.
We're not adopting, so,
Yes,
so all of
next
these.
meeting, we have to
I-
make sure of it.
Next time.
I mean, we could have pushed through the cannabis changes one tonight, without doing a second reading, if that would, but,
We had some questions.
yeah, exactly. So, Sue, do you have in front of you the ones that were taken off the table?
Yes, 5:90, 5:290, 7:150, and 8:30, all held.
Do you want to run through them? You want to run through them individually, or
Oh.
how do you want to do this? Anybody have any questions?
As in, like, redo the policy committee? It was so much fun the first time.
Well, let's start with the ones, some of them are just, as we go through them, some of them were just updated on legislation stuff that really has no effect on the policy. As you look through them too, there were some that added language in the event that one of the board members stepped out of line one way or the other about appointing a special investigator type and how that all happens. And there is also more or less, if you want to call it inclusivity language or equity language regarding domestic violence and gender violence into the program first, so it's not just sexual violence, it's not just, racial violence, they include gender as well in there. So a lot of that seems to be the crux of the majority of them. The big one we talked about was the cannabis one that that we'd like to have a policy in place after the next meeting. That had a lot of questions that we had regarding reporting mechanisms, detection mechanisms and stuff like that for mostly around cannabis and any other drugs. Alcohol's a little easier when you can get a PBT and have an officer test them. So we had some questions about those. But the majority of them, I think that covers the majority of them, right?
Yeah, I can add in a few things. That was good summary though. There are a few changes to do with the seating of board members, including having, when the board is filling a vacancy, having 60 days rather than 45 to fill the vacancy. Also, if there were to be a board election and nobody was seated, there's language about the incumbent holding the seat for a particular amount of time or holding the seat, and that we should contact our attorney if that ever happens, and our attorney will guide us. There was some language about board member conflict of interest. So there are new laws, for grants, and so all of the requirements for board members that applied to other expenditures also apply to grants. So there's a lot of updating of language regarding that. When Chris and I were at this seminar last week, it was mentioned by the attorney running the seminar that board members cannot be, you can't be a board member if you have $7,000 worth of interest in one of our contracts. So we're going to contact our attorney based on the request of the committee. We'll contact our attorney to see if he believes that should be added to this language, because we didn't delve very deeply into that topic at the seminar. So there was kind of question about that, so we'll look at whether that should be added, and if it does get added, we'll bring that to you in the second reading.
And then 2:200 was the types of Board of Education meetings, and it added language regarding specific employees that can be discussed in closed session. To add
Actually, non-employees.
non-employees,
It added non-employees,
right,
I'm sorry.
specific individuals who serve as an independent contractors in a park, recreational, educational setting, which applies to us, or specific volunteers. So it added language to those, because we talk about personnel issues and confidence in closed session. This just added another group of people that we can do those discussions with about in private.
Yeah, that one.
And then a lot of wordsmithing and a lot of language changes. It added a couple of new, some of the forms updated to talk about, the closed session thing that I just talked about, who we can talk about, and there's forms that were updated on there. I had it here just a second ago. So a lot of the language on some of these policy updates are, so here's an example. Except when the board president is subject to a complaint of sexual harassment, a witness or otherwise conflicted, appoint a qualified outside investigator to conduct an independent review of allegations of sexual harassment made against a board member by another board member. So if it was against me, then Stephen would appoint that special investigator. If it was anybody else, then gives me the ability to appoint that special investigator, so that takes that conflict out of there. And that type of language is kind of migrates through a lot of these policies of dealing with that, and so does a lot of the equity type of stuff, kind of migrates all the way through these policies.
To go back for a second to the drug and alcohol-free workplace policy, which we had a lot of conversation about, there are really two topics that we were talking about that we realized we want to come back to, possibly with our attorney present at the next meeting. One is that there's all of this whole list of things that people can't do, right, while on district premises. And what this policy is also allowing, should you so to adopt it, is it could also say, or while being on call. And so the board has to decide whether or not you want to adopt that. And there was a list of various people who might be on call. So for example, maintenance staff, for example, me, for example, your principals. You could decide that you would tell people 24 hours in advance, hey, you're on call for the next 24 hours, and therefore need to be, for lack of a better way of saying it, drug and alcohol free during those 24 hours. So that's up to you if that's something that you want to do. And it sounded like you wanted some more conversation with our attorney about that? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the last piece that we frankly didn't even get to in the committee meeting because we were pushing for time at the end there, but I'll bring up now, is there's another kind of question, another decision point in this policy. There is language about e-cigarettes, and there is a whole lot of, there's like a whole long list of items that you could choose to have in that list. So it could say, instead of saying includes but is not limited to any electronic nicotine delivery system, let me say it this way. You can either have a long list of things that we can't have on campus that have to do with tobacco, or it could say, or it could be a broader one. It could be more vague. So I don't know what you want to do about that. And maybe you'll want to just you all have a copy of the policy, take a look at it between this month and next month. Okay. And if our attorney's not available that evening, I think I have an understanding of what it is you want to discuss, and so I'll get an opinion from him. Okay?
Any questions on any of those?
Super quick one. On 5:20, do we feel that the list of protected classes adequately includes gender identity? It's not called out specifically. It says sex.
Which one is that?
5:2.20 workplace harassment prohibit. I can't talk anymore. 5:20. It's a big long list.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure it isn't called out explicitly, but
That
I
is
wanted to get your
interesting.
take on, is it implicit in there somewhere and I'm missing it?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the word,
Sex and gender, as we know, are two different things.
they are, and then there's also gender identification.
Well, that's what I
It's
actually
not
meant,
in
if
there.
sex, I mean, I think if you
Yeah.
say gender identity, it covers.
Mhm.
So just a thought. I didn't know if you guys were assuming that
Yeah.
there was another term there that covered it, but I didn't see one, so I just wanted to check.
Mhm, see it.
So you're asking to add that in, I assume?
Yeah, if it's not explicit, I think.
Mhm.
I think you're right, yeah,
Okay.
it's a good catch.
That'll probably be next month.
Yeah. I'll say it'll probably be next month's update anyway. But we will be ahead of the curve yet again. All right, so maybe after the word, it could say ancestry, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity?
Yeah, and maybe we check, I know we had a list from Lurie's that maybe we could just double check to make sure we have it accurate. I mean, that's just my guess, that maybe our resources.
Make sure we align it with our committee, align it with all the other language we've been using.
Yeah.
That would be helpful. Can always add to, just can't subtract.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so next will be topics for future agenda items. Somebody's got a list.
I do. So next month, we will have the Lake County Board coming to present us with an honorary resolution to recognize Meadowview School and the school district for the Green Ribbon Award. That'd be really nice. In January, yeah. And we'll have our second reading of policies.
We're gonna have more cake.
We will not have more cake.
Put that half in the freezer for next time.
Well, I could maybe bring you some things from the sweet table for my daughter's wedding.
We had cake the last time they were here.
And anything you have, John? Okay.
Just the conversation that
Well, let's add that in now. So we'll bring back. So what?
I have down 2 years financials, so discussion, I'm more in that discussion of the impact of approving an eventual property tax application.
And I'll kind of lay out the scenario that I'm thinking in my head so that you
You'll
can
share
just fill in the
information.
numbers. Does that make sense?
You'll communicate
Oh,
with
yeah.
him? Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Time to start talking about registration fees for next year.
Okay.
Okay, you just had time to start talking about. So what
We
does
do
that
it
mean?
annually. We do it
Right,
annually.
do
We
you
review
want
the
us to come to you, do we come to you with a
recommendation.
recommendation?
Yeah, usually they give us information on what's average, what everybody else is doing around us, where we're at. And, a couple years back, we did a quick study, make sure that we were, like for, you're talking registration fees, but I was talking more along the lines of activity fees as well, is where we made sure that they were covering the costs. But let's stick with the registration fees for now.
Are we causing any trouble for ourselves or for anybody if that doesn't happen until the February meeting? And I'm only asking,
When does registration packets start going?
Kindergarten registration is, will open in March.
So we need
Send
a,
out information on
I'm just thinking about time. Hold on a second.
I think we've held the line on those for the last couple of years. I don't think we've adjusted them.
Okay, so that board meeting is the 15th,
Very good.
and then we have one on the February 5th.
Discussion could be that late, couldn't it?
Say it again?
That discussion could be as late as February 5th, couldn't it?
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll look at that between now and tomorrow, and we'll put it on for the 15th if we need to, but otherwise it might be for the 5th, just to give us more time to make a good recommendation. Okay. All right.
All right, public comments? I just have one. One of our teachers out of Park Campus and her husband, who is a teacher at Central, had a fire at their house the last couple of days. They're displaced. They are currently living in a hotel. The Vine downtown is doing a Toys for Tot drive and a raffle. Well, they're already taking donations for the family, and they've got jars in there inside the Vine for donations to help them cover some expenses. Mike Pruitt from the Vine and the Vine Facebook page has put out a lot of information out there for it about what they're looking for and what help we can do. So I just kind of wanted to put that out to the board that, we currently have more or less a homeless teacher that might need help from anybody in the community or anybody you want to donate as well. So if you have time Friday night, stop in at the Vine. They got a Toys for Tot drive and 50/50 raffle and donation jars and everything along those lines for the Joseph family. And I need a motion to go to closed session. So moved.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Nash, Miller, Mack,
Aye.
Strack,
Aye.
Weedman,
Aye.
Braden.